Good morning, Vaughn.
Good morning, Harold.
End of another interesting week. Legislative session is over. Bills 14 and 15 are behind us, or maybe not.
Well, the government's kind of hoping that, it got through the session, they survived, they got through the very controversial pieces of legislation that they wanted to get through, two bills that give the cabinet the power to override regulations and authorities in order to approve energy projects in one case, infrastructure in the other case. So there was a lot of opposition, a lot of criticism, but the government said, we're doing this, and they did. They got them both through the House Wednesday night. Both cases, you had tie votes. All the opposition members were opposed. So the Speaker exercised his option to cast a vote. He broke the tie in favor of the government in both cases. Both pieces of legislation went through. No surprise that the Speaker, who's a New Democrat, would use the casting vote for that purpose. But yeah, we got through, wrapped up on Thursday, and they won't be back until October. Now, as I said, the government hopes to put all the controversy behind them. But on the last day, on Thursday, we had an open letter from the major Indigenous organizations in the province, the First Nations Leadership Council, saying we're not giving up the fight. They are going to use every legal means they have to oppose what the New Democrats are trying to do. So that is a pretty significant breach between the NDP and a group that in many cases has supported what the NDP is trying to do and worked with them.
Makes it complicated for the members they have who are First Nations as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked to them, and of course, I guess the most prominent, you got a cabinet minister, Davidson, the environment minister. So she's Haida. She said, nope, she believes the government and thinks the government is determined to work with First Nations. She doesn't have a problem. And there was an interview with Joan Phillips. So she's the member for Vancouver Strathcona. Her husband is Grand Chief Stuart Phillip of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the most outspoken critic of this. So one of our colleagues interviewed both of them, and they both said it's made for some interesting discussions in their family home. They've been married for 40 years. But, the Grand Chief said, look, I understand that my wife is representing her constituents. The three Indigenous members of the government voted for the government's legislation. And if they hadn't done that, of course, the legislation wouldn't have gotten through. It's that close in the BC legislature.
Right. So I guess overall, what would your report card be? We can move to the opposition in a moment, but these bills dominated the latter part of the session. But overall, what kind of a session was it for the government?
Oh, I think it was pretty bumpy. The House is to some degree a place for the opposition to hold the government to account and for controversy. And the New Democrats spent a lot of the session dealing with controversies, many of which were in the news headlines, many of which were the same issues that have preoccupied the David Eby government really since David Eby took over. It was a bumpy session, a lot of days that the cabinet ministers were on their feet trying to explain what they're doing to fix things. And I think there'd be a big sigh of relief when the place adjourned Thursday that they survived it, and there maybe be less attention on them, because we're moving into summer and because the legislature won't be back until, as I say, just before Thanksgiving.
And how about the performance of John Rustad and the BC Conservatives in opposition?
Well, the opposition parties have two jobs, and the first one is holding the government to account, and I think the Conservatives did a good job of that. And especially if you figure they're an inexperienced group, most of their members hadn't sat in the legislature before. They did a very good job, I think, of pushing the government on a bunch of the issues, the ones I've mentioned, public safety, deficit, lack of explanation for how the New Democrats are going to get spending under control, healthcare shutdowns, and the health minister was not good on her feet, Josie Osborne, explaining, rationalizing what the government's doing about that. Pediatric doctors at Kelowna Hospital warned the government this is the way things were headed last September. And nevertheless, it happened. And now the minister says, well, we're dealing with it. Well, you've had plenty of time to deal with it. It's shut down for 6 weeks. And she says, oh, well, you can always take your kids to the emergency ward in a busy big city hospital. So the opposition has done that part of its job well. Now, the other part of being an opposition party is showing you're ready to govern. And the Conservatives came close, as you say, last year. I don't think they did as well on that issue. They are still shaky. So 2 weeks into the session, the Conservatives split. There's a breakaway group calling themselves independents, 3 of them, and they may form themselves into another political party. And those 2 parties, the Conservatives and the Independents, sniped away at each other during the session, sometimes with more enthusiasm with which they sniped at the government. So they've got to sort that out. You're not going to be able to persuade a significant number of British Columbians that you're ready to form government if you can't even get your own group to work together. So that's a big question mark over the Conservatives. And I think, it's going to take them some time to sort that out. It may be we end up with 2 Conservative parties. That seems to be the way things are headed. So the real Conservatives and the not those Conservatives, I don't know what they'll call themselves, but that does seem to be the way things are headed.
And that would be a party of 3 if they all joined forces, which would push the Green Party of 2 to what? 4th party status.
4th, yeah, that's interesting. The Conservatives haven't, the breakaway ones haven't formed themselves. There's still 3 independents, but you're right. If they decided to call themselves some new political party, whatever they call themselves, a populist party or something like that, they become the 3rd largest party in the legislature, 3 members, and the Greens would be pushed down to the 4th party. It matters because of the order in which you get to ask questions in question period. And you get, if you're a party, you get extra salaries for your leader and your house leader and your caucus chair, and you get more research money. So probably, I'm thinking, when the House comes back in the fall, the Independents will have sorted that out. We'll see. The Greens, interesting thing, they started the session by signing an agreement with the New Democrats to work together. So the 2 Greens would be there to vote for the government when it needed their votes on budgets and taxes and confidence matters. But that agreement didn't work out as smoothly as the 2 sides thought. The Greens opposed the New Democrats on some major pieces of legislation. They managed to persuade the government to amend the first bill they had concerns about. That was Bill 7. It was to expedite measures to deal with the Trump tariffs. So the parties worked that out. The Greens supported that. They never came to any agreement on the 2 bills we talked about earlier, the Bill 14 and Bill 15. The Greens thought the government was giving its cabinet way too much power. They agreed with Indigenous leaders that it was an overreach. They wanted the New Democrats to back off, and the New Democrats didn't. So the Greens joined the other opposition parties in voting against that. So the working together agreement, which worked pretty well with John Horgan in the Green Party, led by Andrew Weaver, at least for 2 years, it has not gone as smoothly with David Eby and the Greens. And I don't know what the future of that arrangement is, but it's certainly the government, needed all of its own members to get its legislation through, including the Speaker breaking a tie because the Greens were not there when the New Democrats wanted them to be.
So the Premier, I'm sure, is saying a fond farewell to the sitting of the legislature and heading off to Asia on a trade mission.
Yeah, I think these things are necessary. We haven't had very many of them in the last little while. COVID, of course, disrupted travel, and then you had an election. But Eby is off on his way to an Asian trade mission. And a lot of those are just a matter of going to your trading partners and saying, we appreciate you investing in our province and buying our stuff. And with, Donald Trump on the rampage, we hope we can maintain that relationship. And do you want to know anything? Can we answer any questions? So he's off. The deputy premier, Nikki Sharma, who's also our attorney general, she's on her way to Ottawa next week on a couple of things. The first one is BC wants bail reform from the federal government. The federal government said it reformed the bail system last year and made some changes. BC says it isn't good enough. We're still in a catch and release situation, although I don't use that phrase, but the opposition does. And the other thing is the prime minister is calling together the provincial governments in the country next week. He wants to lay out his plan to fast track approvals of major projects. So mines, port expansion, things like that. The prime minister says we got to get to where we can get these things done in 2 years. Well, the province, I think that's one reason why the province stuck to putting its legislation through, because to approve a major project in this country, you really need the provincial and federal governments working together. So I think she'll be down there, our deputy premier, to find out what Ottawa's plan is, but also to say we're going to be there to work with you because we want this stuff approved. Well, mines, 10 years, 12 years. Yeah, it'd be nice if they could get it down to 2 years, although I guess I'll remain skeptical.
Yes, so the prime minister, in my understanding, he wants to have a lot of this stuff sorted, so he has some major things to talk about come Canada Day. Like he's looking at getting a lot of things done in June.
Well, I mean, I think he was elected on the assumption that he's the action man to actually deal with this. And he's laid out a bunch of things that he wants to happen. He wants an agreement, you're right, by July 1st on interprovincial trade barriers. He wants those wiped away. Well, BC has said they're there on that. But that's coming up. And you're right. The prime minister wants action by July the 1st. And on that one, I think he's reading the public well. And I think that's probably a reason why David Eby and the New Democrats decided to push ahead with their legislation in spite of the opposition from Indigenous leaders in the province.
Right. Okay. Thanks again, as always, Vaughn. We'll see you again next week.
Yep, next week it is, Harold. Thanks very much.